Hello and welcome to the first part of your video lecture. So today we're going to talk about just a general intro to programming and Python in general. So we should have done this in class, but in case you need the information, here is the website to download Python. Hopefully by the time that you're watching this that it will all have been settled, but in case it's not, here's that information. We're going to talk a little bit about commands in Python. But to do that, the first thing we need to talk about is the ways that you can tell Python to do something. So if you haven't done any other programming languages, this may not be super exciting to you, but Python is what is called an interpreted language, which means that it can run one line or a few lines of a program one at a time. You don't need to write an entire program and run that entire program. You can run everything bit by bit. And I'll show you what we mean by that in just a second. But before I do, I want to talk about three main ways that we can run Python. So the first way is using something called the command line, or if you're on a Mac or Linux system, the terminal. And this is kind of what you might think of if you've ever seen a movie that tries to portray someone, quote, hacking something. These are those little black boxes that just have a lot of text, and you see people typing into them furiously, and supposedly they like hack into the Pentagon or something like that. So we'll be using that actually a little bit later, so I'll show you that in a bit. Another way to do this is with something called idle, and this is something that came with your installation of Python. If you wanted to search for it on your computer, you could find something called idle. And idle is built specifically to run Python. It's really nice, it's really easy, but the one thing that's negative about it is that it was only built for Python. So we're actually going to be using the third option, which is a text editor called Atom. And hopefully you've seen this already because we will have installed it in class. If you have any trouble, go ahead and let me know. But Atom is a text editor, and what we do with Atom is we can type and run our code. So we'll do that in just a second. So the first thing that we're going to do in Python is a really famous programming assignment. It's called Hello World. And the goal of this assignment is to get our program, in this case Python, to print out the string Hello World. So we're going to go ahead and go to Atom and see how to do this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we are going to go to Atom. And we're going to use packages, and we've already installed this. Go to Platformio IDE terminal, open a new terminal. And what we're going to do is we're going to type out that code that we wrote before. And I just really want to quickly show you, this is what I mean by the fact that Python can be run one line at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type out Python 3, and I'm going to hit enter. And this is going to open something where what I can do is I can run whatever Python code I want. All I have to do is type it and press enter and it'll run. So I'm going to go ahead and type print, which is a function in Python that tells Python that you want whatever is in the parentheses to print out to the screen. So I'm going to say print and then quotations, hello. Well, I would like to spell that correctly. Print hello world. And I'm going to go ahead and press enter, and you can see that it printed out that string hello world into my console. So again, this is what I mean by Python can run one line at a time. We just typed one line and it ran it for us. It didn't need an entire program or anything. Okay, so we printed out what's called a string. That's what's in a quotation marks there. But sometimes we might want to do something a little more complicated, and we'll go over this a little bit more again later. But I might want to, instead of saying hello world, want to say hello to my user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called name, and I'm going to set it equal to input what is your name. And what this function, the input function, does is it asks the user whatever question I put inside the parentheses, and then it stores whatever they type into my variable called name. So when I run it, you can see it asked me my question. I'm going to type in Chelsea, press enter. So now if I type name, you can see that it knows that Chelsea is my name. So now instead of printing out hello world, I'm going to print hello space and, oops, not Chelsea, name. And this, when I run it, is going to print out hello, and then it's going to print out whatever was stored in the name variable, which is what I typed, my name, Chelsea. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is scripts, and we'll be writing these as we go in Python. And scripts are essentially a collection of code that all run together for some purpose. So one thing that we have as part of our scripts or part of our programs is something called modules. We won't be using those just yet. We're going to wait like a lesson or two, but these are essentially pieces of Python code that someone else has written that you want to use in your script. So we talked a little bit in some of our introduction lectures about the fact that Python is free in the sense that you can do whatever you want with it, which means that anything that you can think of doing, someone else has probably thought of doing, and they probably wrote some code, and probably better code than we could ever write, to do that. And so what we can do is use this import statement to tell Python, hey, someone else has written some code, I want to use it, get it ready for me to use. So we'll talk a little bit about that more as we use it. But basically, modules are things that let you use Python code from outside your actual script inside your script. The second part is functions, and these are sort of like modules in the sense that these are pieces of code that have a very specific purpose, but these are things that you have written yourself. So we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the class, but the next thing that we use, and honestly we've already been using, are statements and expressions. So statements are just a line of code that tells Python to do something, and expressions are essentially statements that evaluate to a value. So something saying like my int, which would be a variable plus 5, that is doing a calculation, coming up with the answer or a value, and then returning that value so that you can use it. And one of the most important parts of your code, especially in this class, but honestly, until the day you stop coding, are comments. And comments are things that the computer doesn't read, but we read. So while Python's purpose is for you to be able to tell the computer what you want it to do, humans, probably you and me for sure in this class, are going to be reading your code. And so you need to make sure that people who are reading your code understand what your code is doing, whether that's me when I'm grading or you when you come back to your code and forgot everything that you just did. So in Python, the way that you do the way that you do a comment is with a pound sign or a hashtag. And so what happens when you do this in Python is that everything after the pound sign is not read by Python. Python sees that hashtag or pound sign and it says, oh, this isn't for me. And it'll just ignore everything after that. And then you can also do multi-line comments, and this is in a case where you need to write something longer or you have some other reason that you need your comment to cover more than one line. You can use triple single quotes. I know that's confusing, but you're going to use 3 of the single quotes to open and 3 of the single quotes to close. So let's take a look at how this would look in your program. Okay, so I have open a script. This is actually what we were doing earlier. Actually, I had it commented, but you can see that I have a couple lines. So for instance, this one or this one that start with a hashtag or a pound sign, and these are comments. You can see that Adam actually will turn them a different color because it knows it's not part of the program. So any line that I start with a hashtag, Python's just not even going to look at it. But I can also use these on a line that also contains code. So for instance, you can see here, I have some valid Python code, but I also have a comment. And so basically what happens here is Python will read this and it will use it. And then anything after the hashtag here is still seen as a comment. And so Python will just ignore it and not do anything. If I need to, I can do what I said, those multi-line comments. So I can say, hello, I'm Chelsea, and then close that off. And Python will also ignore this. There's a couple special uses for these multi-line quotes. We won't talk about that till the end of the class, but if you ever need it, it's there for you. Okay, so one other thing that makes Python really cool and it honestly sets it apart from a lot of other programming languages is its use of Whitespace. And Whitespace refers to things like spaces or tabs or new lines, things that we don't, like when you look at a program, you don't see anything in the whitespace, but you can see that it's there. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get to things that use whitespace, but for now I want to show you something about how Python will use whitespace. So one thing that I can do is if I want to set a variable x equal to 7, I can write it like that. Python is totally fine with that. I like it. I think it looks nice. But Python actually ignores whitespace in lines like this. So if I do this, same thing to Python as if I had it all the way back here. Similarly, I don't need to have a space. Python knows what that is. The spaces are more for me in this case to be able to read things. However, there are times, and don't worry about this too much, we'll cover if statements in a little bit, but if I have an if statement, if I say if x equals 7, so this is telling Python, hey, if the variable x is equal to 7, which we know it is, we just saw that right there, if it's equal to 7, then you can see Adam actually added it for me, but you see this here, this space here, this is white space, and in this case it means something to Python. So I'm saying if blah blah blah, then anything that is indented, anything that has a space underneath this if statement, run it only if this statement is true. So I'm going to say if x equals 7, print 7, because I'm super excited that it's 7. So let me comment this out. And so I'm actually, we should have done this in class a little bit, but I'm going to show you another way to run code in Python. So I'm going to go ahead and save my file really quickly. I can tell it's unsaved because you can see this in the corner is blue, so I'm going to just save that really quick. And I'm going to exit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say Python, oops, I'm going to spell it right, Python 3. And then the name, which again is just right here, of my script, which is lesson1.py. And remember, Python does care about like upper and lowercase, so make sure it's spelled exactly the same way. And so I'm going to run that. Oh, it's going to tell me I have an error. It's probably because I commented out this line. Okay, so let's go ahead and uncomment that. So in case you missed that, basically what happened is I asked if x equals 7 and Python said, you haven't told me what x is. Okay, so I'm going to save again. I'm going to run it. Oh, nope, not going to run it. Save. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this again. And you can see that it printed out 7 exclamation point. That's because I set x equal to 7. Then I asked Python, if x is equal to 7, which it is, then do everything that is underneath and indented from this if statement. And it said, oh, okay, well, x is equal to 7, so I'm going to do whatever you put over there, and it printed the string 7. I just want to show you really quickly what would happen. Look, so I have the exact same code. The only thing that I changed is that I unindented. I got rid of that white space to the left of that print statement. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to run, and Python is going to say, oh no, you're wrong. And it even tells you how you're wrong. It says indentation error. Remember, indentation is one of the types of white space that Python uses. So it says, I expected an indented block. You had an if statement, and if statements come with indented code. you didn't indent any code, so it's going to not run and it's going to tell you that it thinks you're wrong. If we just fix that really quickly, it will happily run again. Okay, so going with that, one of the really important things in Python is that you want to be consistent with your whitespace. So one thing that we can do to get that indent is to tab, to press like the tab button on your keyboard. We could also just press space 4 times. It doesn't particularly matter which one you use, especially some text editors are really nice and will convert tabs to spaces for you. But the one thing to remember is that if you use tabs for some of your indents and spaces for other indents, Python may not like that. And it's really easy if you're using spaces to like accidentally only use 3 or something like that. So make sure whatever you're doing that you are consistent. If you're going to use tabs, use tabs. If you're going to use spaces, use spaces. But the preferred way to do this in Python is to put spaces when you're trying to indent things. Okay, so another part of Python that we've already been using are things called tokens. These are things that have a very special meaning to Python already. Unlike variables, which don't mean anything until you assign something to it, tokens mean something to Python and you cannot change what they mean. So for instance, we saw an if statement, which asks if a certain statement is true. There's also other ones that we'll look at, like else or a list. These are things that you cannot change. These are things that exist in Python's world that mean something. If means, oh, I'm going to do this certain thing. Similarly, operators, which are just like operators that you saw in math class, those mean something to Python. Plus means add, the star means multiply. These are things that have a meaning to Python and do an operation on like variables or objects in Python. We also have punctuations and delimiters. So these don't actually do anything. Things like the comment or a semicolon or parentheses or brackets or curly brackets. These don't do anything. They're not operators, like they don't perform a function in Python, but they're things that help us, actually similar to how punctuation works in like English. These help Python understand what you're trying to do. And then the last category of tokens that we'll talk about right now are things called literals. And these are things like integers, like the number 123, or floats, like decimals 7.6, or true or false values, which we call booleans. We'll go over that later. These mean something to Python. You can't tell Python, oh, 123 now equals 247. Python will just go like, no, like it's 123. Like you can't change that. So those are literals. Those are things that just have a value that you can't change in Python. Okay, so that's the end of the lecture. We will pick up on the next video with variables and how to name them.